Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Price with Michigan Independent Colleges and Universities. Thank you for joining us today for the MiTransfer Pathways Summit Recap webinar. This webinar will review information from the MiTransfer Pathways Summit that was held on Friday, October 19th at Adrian College. And this was the second summit for Phase 1 programs. In the webinar, we will discuss what took place during the working sessions and also review next steps. Presenters for the webinar today are Will Emerson with the Michigan Association of State Universities, Erica Oriens and Katie Giardello with the Michigan Center for Student Success with the Michigan Community College Association. And also this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the MiTransfer website later. And if you have any questions, please put those in the chat section on your screen. And we will begin the webinar now with Will. Thanks, Will.
Hi, everybody. During the introduction last week, we talked about the scope of the project. We began with the Transfer Steering Committee and its makeup. Shannon reintroduced the 4 pathways and included IPEDS data, which supports the selection of the major pathways. I then talked about it being a faculty-driven project and the process having the end result in mind, which, of course, is developing multi-institution articulation agreements known as pathways. With so much talk about talent in our state and throughout higher education, ultimately we need the talent of faculty. We need faculty expertise. I reiterated that on Friday, May 18th, more than 200 faculty and staff members came together from across the state to take part in the first ever MiTransfer Pathways Summit. Representatives participated from all 15 public universities, 10 independent colleges, and all 28 community colleges throughout Michigan. Shannon then presented information about Michigan lagging behind peer states in the percentage of community college students who transfer with an associate's degree. Nationally, it's 34%. Michigan lags behind at 24%. Or transfer and earn a bachelor's degree. Nationally, it's 42%, with Michigan at 37%. Thus, Michigan needs better strategies so more students can earn degrees. I then talked about the transformative nature of this work, saying, the work we'll do today will mean more students are ready for transfer and ready to finish their degrees. Ultimately, this is not about taking the rigor out of the class, but about taking the rigor out of the process. This project is not just about transforming the transfer process, but also about improving the experience of transfer for students. We don't want students to lose time or money, and more importantly, students must not lose hope. MiTransfer pathways are designed to make the overall experience of exploring transfer options more efficient and easier to understand. Shannon illustrated the impact of this project with Phase 1 and Phase 2 encapsulating 38% of all degrees conferred in Michigan. Then I finished my portion by discussing the historic nature of this work. MiTransfer pathways and the MTN upgrade are the result of an unprecedented level of partnership and cooperation between the public universities, community colleges, and independent colleges and universities in Michigan. It has been valuable to bring faculty together throughout the state and across sectors to have these conversations and really to build a sense of community where perhaps there wasn't space to build one before. Lastly, the CEO of the Michigan Association of State Universities, Dr. Dan Hurley, talked about this as a defining moment. He conveyed 2 primary points. Dan extended his appreciation to all faculty and staff participating in the summit, stating, we are not a system in the state, nor do we want a system, but we can put in place a transfer process that is systemic, organized, and seamless in nature. Today's work is an inflection point, a defining moment. This is where the hard work is being done. Dan then thanked everyone for coming together, saying, please know how important this work is and that your work really is making a turning point in our state's higher ed history with respect to coming together on a statewide basis in the spirit of cooperation to benefit students, and certainly he feels it will benefit all of the participating institutions in the state overall. And at that point, we handed it off to Erica. Erica?
Great, thanks, Will, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. I'm sure that you were, if you weren't able to join us last Friday, you're anxious to learn about what happened. So as Will pointed out, we wanted to provide this recap webinar today to give you some information about what our process looked like on Friday, what the outcomes were, and what we're asking colleges to do as part of their next steps. So one of the things that I wanted to do is, in this first part of the webinar, is talk with you about really what we're looking for, what the end result of this might look like. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of where we're going with this work. When we kicked off this work in May, we were kind of unsure where we would get, what the end result would be, what this would look like in the end. But as the faculty have worked together on these pathways, as they've been supported by their transfer processes at their institutions, we have a much better idea of what things look like. The first thing I want to mention is that, as many of you know, in addition to building these associate to bachelor's degree transfer pathways, we are replacing the Michigan Transfer Network. This slide shows what the Michigan Transfer Network looks like today. And I wanted to share with you a screenshot of what the MTN will look like in the future. As you can see, it has a modern look and feel. Much of the information at the top of the page is very student focused. Not only will students be able to look up course equivalencies as they do now, but we'll provide information about the Michigan Transfer Agreement and MiTransfer pathways. In addition, you'll notice at the bottom there are several icons for faculty and advisors and administrators, and this is where we hope to share information with those of you who do a lot of advising with students as well, as you navigate this transfer, the transferability of courses, the MTA and programs at institutions. What I want to talk about a little bit is, so what will these MiTransfer pathways look like? How will students figure out what they need to take? And the first thing I want to do is show you an example from the Michigan Transfer Agreement, because what we plan to do with the MiTransfer pathways is very similar to what we currently do with the MTN. So for example, if a student comes to mitransfer.org and they see a box here that says Michigan Transfer Network, or excuse me, Michigan Transfer Agreement, they click on more, they will navigate to a page that looks something like this, that provides a very brief description of what the MTA looks like. We are following a kind of a rule of 140 characters on these pages. Students don't read very much. Many of us don't read very much on pages like this. And so we're making sure that we're very succinct in our language about what this is. So we go to the Michigan Transfer Network, and as students do now on the macro website, they can, if they're starting at a community college, let's say Delta College, for example, then that student would click on Delta College and they would be able to see what the specific requirements are for the MTA at Delta College. As you can see here, Delta provides information for students about what courses are eligible for English composition, what courses are eligible for English Comp or Communications, and so on. If the student is interested in transferring to Eastern Michigan University, for example, they will also be able to go back to this MTA page, click on, I'm interested in transferring to Eastern Michigan University, and they'll get to a page that the Community College Relations Office at Eastern manages that describes to students how the MTA is processed at Eastern and what additional courses are required to complete the MTA. So at Eastern, students actually can complete more courses to finish their general education requirements, and they can complete some of those at a community college, although some of those need to be completed at the university as well. So this is how we plan on incorporating the MTA into the new MiTransfer website. So let's talk about how we're planning on incorporating in these MiTransfer pathways. We're back on the main page of the site, and you see here that there will be another page where students can navigate out to the MiTransfer pathways. If we click more on that page, we'll get to another page that shows us and explains to students what the MiTransfer pathways are. So they can complete an entire associate degree and then transfer those courses to any participating university. So let's pretend like we're doing the same thing. And in this case, we again start at a sample community college. And that sample community college will be explaining to students how they complete courses at that college in the biology transfer pathway. So very consistently, students are seeing from their community college what specific courses are required in that biology transfer pathway. And that information will be on there. Once the student decides where they plan on transferring, that another university may share with students how that biology MiTransfer pathway applies at the university. So while we are doing these statewide transfer pathways, we know that we don't have quite enough credits that are common across all of the institutions to tell students exactly what to take. And so what we'll do is the community colleges will communicate the MTA requirements and the MiTransfer pathway requirements, and then the universities will communicate any remaining requirements that students can complete at the community college. So how are we going to get there? Many of you know that we brought together faculty on May 18th to identify courses that students should take in their pathway. We brought those faculty and transfer liaisons back together in October, and we asked them to take those courses and put them into a degree program, which we described as designing their program maps. So in the first phase, we identified those courses. Now, how do those courses fit into a program? The other thing that we asked faculty to begin doing in May, and we continue to ask them to do, is how those courses are to articulate those direct equivalencies in the Michigan Transfer Network. So the courses that faculty identified in May, we want to make sure those courses are transferable between community colleges and universities, and we're asking people to do that in the MTN. We plan on signing an articulation agreement for these first phase of pathways on May 9th of 2019. We will be inviting all of the colleges and universities who are participating in these pathways to a ceremony in Lansing. We will also invite policymakers who have funded this work for us, and also the media, so that we can begin our media campaign so students understand how these pathways will work. I just described to you that on the MiTransfer.org, there will be these pages that are maintained by the community colleges and universities. Much of this can be included in your college catalogs, and many of you maintain sites already specifically to be able to communicate information to transfer students. So we'll begin to build those sites that we'll link to on the new MTN site, and then we'll begin to welcome students. So with that said, I want to talk about what our agenda looked like to be able to, our agenda on October 19th, so we can actually begin to welcome students a year from now.
Hey, Erica.
When faculty came to get, yes.
We have a question.
Sure.
The question is, will the end product of phase 1 be one articulation agreement for all 4 areas, or will the schools sign a separate articulation agreement for each subject area?
That's a great question. Thanks. I didn't cover that. But yes, our expectation would be that some institutions will participate in some programs and some institutions will not. And so there will be 4 different agreements, and institutions can pick which agreement they're planning to be a part of.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Great. Yeah, continue to ask questions throughout, and we'll monitor the question pane. So when we brought the faculty together, we had 2 major parts of our agenda. The first part of our agenda before lunch was to address what we were describing as the parking lot issues from May of 2018. So when we brought the faculty together in May of 2018 to identify courses, we didn't have very much time, and the faculty did a great job of identifying the courses that students should take in the first and second year. But there were some issues that we just didn't have time to address. So we collected those parking lot, we documented those on a parking lot, and then we collected those and had a conversation about those in the morning. Then in the afternoon, we asked the faculty to use the worksheets that we provided to work as a group on completing those worksheets, which we'll talk about the updated worksheets about that today. And then we talked about next steps. And today, what we'll be doing is sharing with you the outcomes of the parking lot discussion, the outcomes of the working session, and then we'll go over all of the next steps with you. So with that, I want to turn it over to Shannon Price to talk about the parking lot and the working session outcomes for the biology program.
Thanks, Erica. So biology made a lot of headway during this meeting. It was great to see the progress that they're making as a group. It was determined that for the pathway courses, it would be biology 1 and 2, general chemistry 1 and 2, and organic chemistry 1 and 2. Physics 1 and 2 will be included as other program requirements on the new worksheet. Previously, in the first meeting, we talked about possibly making that a pathway courses, but it was determined at this meeting that those will be included as other program requirements on the new worksheet. Then for the math pathways, adding college algebra in the Michigan Transfer Agreement, and then add all additional mathematics requirements in the remaining degree requirements. So some good work from biology.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Continue to ask questions as you do about any of these pathways as well. Next, I'll turn it over to Will Emerson to talk about criminal justice. Oh, wait, sorry, we skipped business. I don't want to skip that. Let me talk about business, then Will, I'll turn it over to you. The business faculty came together and they confirmed that microeconomics, macroeconomics, financial accounting, managerial accounting, business law, and CIS are actually common courses across all of the institutions that have been coming to the MiTransfer Pathways meetings, which is consistent with what they decided in the first meeting. What we discovered in the mathematics pathways is that all of the programs require statistics, and all of the programs will accept introductory or general statistics. It does not need to be a business-specific statistics course. We also learned that all programs except Wayne State also require another mathematics course, either college algebra, trig, pre-calc, or calculus. So when colleges and universities are completing their worksheets, they'll need to make sure that the community colleges are recommending that students take statistics, and then depending on where they want to transfer, with the exception of Wayne State, they'll need to take another mathematics course in the college algebra, trig, pre-calc, or calculus pathway. This has some significant implications for community college students because it's likely, given the sequential nature of courses in the college algebra pathway to statistics, students will need to take potentially will need to take multiple courses in order to meet the mathematics requirements for some programs. The other outcome of our parking lot discussion was that the business faculty would like to talk about the learning outcomes for a course that we kind of generally described as principles of management. There are some programs that would recommend that students take that along with a marketing course in the first and second year, but the faculty wanted to nail down a little bit more what the learning outcomes are for those management courses. We will be facilitating a process where the faculty can share those learning outcomes with each other or share their master syllabus from that course with each other so that they could potentially evaluate the equivalency of that course and possibly recommend that students take that course in the first and second year. The other issue that came up in our conversation about the parking lot is the CIS course. Most of the programs want students to have some competency in computer information systems or computer applications, more likely. Excuse me, I have a cold today, so I'm struggling. Most of the programs required some kind of CIS course or a competency in that area, but they wanted to make sure that that everybody understood what those courses were. And in many cases, at many institutions, that could actually be multiple courses in different departments that would meet that requirement. So we will be working with the business faculty to be able to share those CIS course requirements. And finally, the business faculty had discussions throughout about the transferability of 200 to 300 level courses and the institutional and accreditation issues related to that. Most faculty indicated that they were comfortable with the transferability of those courses despite the course number, as long as the learning outcomes were the same. But there were some concerns about the business specific accreditation and if there would be an issue with the 200 to 300 level, or if in fact the course number is actually reflecting not an issue with the upper or lower division, but some specific requirement that that's meeting in terms of having an upper division general ed or something like that. So we'll be following up with the business faculty and with institutions to clarify those policies around the 200 to 300 level transferability. I'll also mention before I turn it over to Will that any faculty that have been involved in any of these pathways in meeting 1 and meeting 2 and all the transfer liaisons will receive a message from us with these details in there, in that message, and providing some guidance about completing the worksheet and also following up on some of these parking lot issues that we addressed. Before I turn it over to Will, are there any questions about business? Katie?
No questions have been typed at this time.
Okay, great. So with that, I will turn it over to Will Emerson to talk about criminal justice.
Hi, everybody again. So we had a spirited discussion in criminal justice. We still have some work to do. We didn't resolve all of the issues that we set out to address. We did determine that the pathways courses will include Intro to Psychology, Intro to Sociology, Intro to Criminal Justice, and Intro to Corrections. Also, we had originally thought that a multiculturalism or diversity course would be part of the pathway. They seem to be a bit more dominant in these programs maybe at first blush than was determined in the meeting on Friday at Adrian College. So we determined that they would be treated not as part of the pathway, but perhaps as strategic electives, so something that would be beneficial in studying criminal justice going forward, but maybe not something that we're going to plug right into the pathway. The CJ team is considering developing multiple tracks or a clustered approach to this pathway in order to accommodate the wide range of approaches to criminal justice instruction across the state. So, for example, there might be an administrative track, or there might be a Homeland Security track. This is something we're going to be talking about. The facilitators are going to get together, hopefully here very soon, and talk about how we might approach this, and then put it out to the faculty and see what they think, and try and move forward from that direction. That's just a thought. As I said, it's very much a work in progress and a state of becoming. And then with regard to the math pathway, that is still undetermined as well. Those statistics and QR are dominant. And it may end up being the case that the math pathway is something that works in an integrative way or intersects with the clustered approach, the multiple track approach as well. So it may be the case that in an administrative track there are a greater number of courses that require either stats or QR. We may plug it in that manner. So there's still some work to be done. I think we're all still very optimistic. There's a sense that this is moving forward, not as rapidly as we would have hoped, but sometimes it does take a little extra time, a little more conversation in order to hit just the right tone. So that's what I have for criminal justice.
And I don't see any questions, but you guys are free to type them as you need to. And I think I'm next.
Thank you, Katie.
Yep. Okay, so I was able to pick up where Jenny Schenker kind of left off with the psychology group, although she was able to join us later in the day and help resolve some of the conversations that we had as well. We had a full discussion of parking lot issues that were raised in the spring, and some of the resolution. The good news was that they agreed readily on items that were outside the scope of this project. So we were able to kind of go through the list of parking lot issues that were lingering and say, nope, we don't need to cover this, this, and this. And that was helpful. Then we got further into the kind of the meat and potatoes of the stuff that really did need to be covered and resolved. And what ended up coming out of that was actually the group decided to refine their list a little bit further. There were a few additional courses suggested at the spring meeting, and those were refined into the 4 courses that you see on the screen: Intro to Psychology, Abnormal Psychology, Social Psychology, and Developmental Psychology. We spent a lot of time talking about mathematics, or more accurately, statistics, and it was commonly accepted that the institutions all required some type of social science or psychology statistics in their programs, although those were typically not first or second year courses. They were typically coming later in the program. And the majority of the universities were requiring mathematics-based or statistics-based, meaning that's where they're cataloged, statistics courses. So that is the recommended mathematics course in the psychology pathway for MTA. And the other major items that were resolved, as you can see on the screen, the non-issues sort of, the 200 or 2,000 to 300 and 3,000 level courses. There was some discussion about both that issue and the notion of course prefixes, and you know, do we need to say you can and can't do this transfer? And the faculty really ultimately decided that they should be making decisions on course alignment or course equivalency based on learning outcome alignment. So they are able to transfer courses at different levels if needed, if they meet the same learning outcomes or learning objectives. And then there was some discussion about advanced placement credit, since AP Psychology is a common course taken in high school. But as with the MTA, there is no decision or approval to use alternative credit in these pathways. The way that MTA has worked and the way that the psych faculty felt comfortable moving forward using AP Psych or not using it was that certainly the institutions can offer their credit for it, but if a community college student receives credit for AP Psych and they wish to transfer it, it has to meet the same cut score as required at the university. So there are some disparities between cut scores, and some folks indicated an interest in wanting to look at that and see where there was consistency or inconsistency. So again, it's not something that we're necessarily covering in the scope of this particular project, but it was a nice conversation, and I think will have positive benefits for students and institutions to come to more consistency with that. And then finally, those last items were all outside of the scope of this project for now. So that is what was discussed in psychology. I'm looking for questions. It doesn't look like there are any. And you guys have me for the rest of the slides here. Of course, my colleagues will be welcome to step in as needed, but there was also a parking lot discussion with transfer liaisons, and they started to talk a lot about implementation issues and things that have been identified on the campus as procedural blocks or perhaps opportunities to reflect on or further refine certain transfer policies and practices. I know the group talked at length about the role of the transfer liaison, really being a coordinator of all of the stakeholders on the campus that are affected or impacted or involved specifically, as in the case of the faculty in these pathway development phases of work. So several transfer liaisons discussed practices on their campus wherein they held preliminary meetings and they tried to get folks on the same page and provide some background on transfer policy that might have been lacking in some of the departments or perhaps is implemented inconsistently in some of the departments. So there was a lot of discussion on the value of that person retaining that role as a coordinator and trying to work with and communicate with their faculty or other involved participants, particularly since our volume of people has prohibited the campus from sending more than one person in each one of the roles. So that transfer liaison is really the person who can kind of pull everyone back together when you get back on campus and explain what had happened during the meeting and what needs to happen at the institutional level to move forward. There was some discussion about what should go into the final agreement. I like to call that the fine print of the articulation agreements. Most of your articulation agreements look quite similar. They have a lot of provisions such as there must be a C or better, or some disciplines require time lengths on course equivalency, and issues like that were discussed. There will be a team that shoots off from the Transfer Steering Committee who will be working in the next few months to develop that boilerplate language, and they will be putting the agreement documentation together and then vetting it with all of the institutions who wish to participate in order to facilitate the final signing in the spring. There was some discussion about how do you track transfer students. I think that's one of the biggest points of pain here when we're talking about interinstitutional relationships. It's hard to track these students because they go between, of course, our institutions, and we don't use the same student information systems, so it can be a little bit challenging to figure out who those students are and are they on an articulation agreement. So there was some talk about that and how institutions are coding that or able to work with their transfer partners to try to make that process a little bit more coherent. Certainly we want to support undecided students, but there was a resounding sort of resolution that this particular project is to create pathways for students who have selected a major. So we want to work with undecided students. We'd like to help them get to a major more quickly, because there's a lot of research that shows the more quickly a student begins major courses, of course, the more quickly they will be able to graduate. So even though we want to build those supports and we want to move those students into pathways, this particular work is meant to support students who've already selected the pathway. And there was some confusion. People thought we were doing some sort of auto-admit policy where if you received the associate degree, then you got an automatic admission into the university program. That is not true. The universities that participate will continue to set their own admission standards, and particularly in business, we know there are some selective institutions or selective admissions institutions for business, and those institutions will likely retain that selectivity. And the community college student will be assured of their transfer of credits, but they're not going to be assured of admission, just as a provision to this project. It's not within the scope. Again, then there was some discussion about communications and marketing, which all kinds of good ideas were discussed, and there was a number of opportunities developed or denoted anyway that the group would roll up. Most of the folks that are involved with that group are involved with the MACRO organization, which is the Michigan Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. And they have some really robust professional development opportunities for their membership around all things admissions and kind of transfer. So there are opportunities being discussed already to create new webinars or have folks present at MACRO events in the future to be able to work through some of these issues that are related, but maybe not necessarily right in the scope of the work. So that is kind of the gist of the transfer liaison conversation. We are inviting transfer liaisons to attend the meeting for phase 2, the first meeting for phase 2. And excuse me, the transfer liaisons are invited to come to that meeting, and there will also be a separate discussion space for those folks. So you will have the opportunity, because we know some of you are going to be attending that meeting as academic stand-ins. If your academic folks can't attend, you can make that choice, whether you need to be in an academic area or you'll stay with the transfer liaison group. So I see a question here about how schools are tracking students. And the one thing that I know that was given as an example is just really the result of communication between and among transfer partners. Some universities indicated they were using codes to demarcate students following articulation agreements, but that is not typically happening until they get to the institution. So some were discussing whether they could put students in as prospects and still have them coded while they were sort of pre-enrolled, if you will, or still enrolled at the community college, for example. So I think for me, that's the most tangible thing that was discussed. I can pause here and see if my colleagues heard anything else that they want to share related to that question.
No, I think there's a lot. This is Erica. I think that there was a lot of interest to share best practices among institutions about how they might be able to fit those practices into their own institutional systems and policies.
And I will also say that the other thing that we kind of discussed after the meeting, maybe not as helpful to those of you that were at the meeting, is that the Canvas forum was developed as a result of multiple stakeholders asking for an opportunity for digital communication between and among participants. So I was suggesting that y'all utilize that and use that opportunity to start new discussion threads like the question that was asked. I also know Kim Rotundo from Northern had offered to share the agenda that she used in the faculty touchpoint meeting she had with all of her, since she's performing the transfer liaison role at NMU. So she said she was going to put that up in Canvas, and I would encourage you all to use that if it fits your needs to be able to share information or ask questions of one another as well. Okay, and then there were a few things. We actually discussed this before the parking lot discussions occurred so that we could get a few things kind of off the table or on the table for everyone's awareness. And I already covered the first. This is not an admission-rooted project. We are not worrying about that. You all will set your own provisions for that. So the first two sort of get at that. And then, again, these are maps for students in completing program requirements, but these cannot be generalized across the board. Every student still will follow a customized plan based on where they want to transfer and whether they want to focus on a certain cognate area. But we are hoping to create this as sort of a springboard or a launch pad for the students who want to transfer and are beginning at a community college, and sort of clarifying and streamlining that pathway. We will always need academic advisors and transfer advisors to help students. People hear about the work we're trying to do with the new website, and they think, oh, this is going to become auto transfer or robot transfer, and that's just never going to happen. You all know that transfer is just too complicated for a single website to answer everyone's questions. So advisors are still going to work closely with students and still work closely together to support students transitioning between the institutions. And we already hit this undecided issue when I was talking earlier. So that's not something that, again, we think it deserves support and those students deserve support, but it's not something that this project is dealing with right now. We already talked about the leveling of courses, and then the same thing with the prefixing, which I know in the MTA there are some provisions about which courses do and don't transfer if they're depending on which department they're taught in, but I don't think any of our first 4 pathways have made a decision that it has to be in a certain prefix or a certain department to get the credit, other than the mathematics, which is an MTA provision for statistics. So, okay, we're gonna move forward. Those were the parking lot issues. The end of the day resulted in us, folks had a working session basically after that actually. So that's not displayed here, but essentially they went off and sort of did their own thing. We had a lot of institutions, the institutions were sitting together, so many of them worked on their worksheets or started to talk about course equivalency issues, but we did have several groups that came together to try and finish their conversations from earlier, the discipline groups. So psychology had sort of an addendum, and I think it was biology that also had an addendum where they just needed to clear some things out and find consensus, which it seems they did for the most part. There are still a few outlying issues. And then we came back together and we started to talk about these next steps, which are on the screen here. So we did a report out of the various sessions, which we already did in the webinar previously. And then we shared with everyone that there's actually a new template for the worksheets. Some of the worksheets were, the previous iteration of the worksheets were a little bit confusing for some people. So we streamlined them a little bit and we made some, here we go, we streamlined the worksheets a little bit. So this is an example of the worksheet for biology, as you can see. We have these all up on the website. So if you go to MiTransfer.net or MiTransfer.net, you'll be able to pull down the appropriate worksheet for your pathway. So there are 4 different ones, and they already have the courses that are agreed upon built in. And the institution is asked to basically fill this new version of the template out and submit it as a final copy. So the previous slide gave you those instructions to submit it as a final copy by December the 1st through the Canvas site. And Erica, I don't know if you can go back quickly to there we go. I just want to point out that when you do go to Canvas, so far we've been working in discipline-specific modules, but these final worksheets for phase 1 will all go into one discussion post. So they will not be disaggregated by discipline area. So some people had lost the link to access the Canvas site, and it is pasted on the screen there. Some of you maybe have not enrolled yet in the Canvas site and need to do so. The link to do that is at the bottom of the slide. And then you can see circled in red where we are asking you to go by December 1st and make the upload for your institution's programs. Okay, thank you. We can go back forward. I said go back forward. Lovely. Okay, so here we go. These are the worksheets, the new iteration of the worksheets. Again, we think this is a little bit more clear. A couple of tips for folks is that we understand and appreciate that some of the courses selected as MiTransfer courses will also fulfill MTA distributions in the section, the first section there. Institutions should plot those courses as fitting to their context. So if students can complete both natural science distributions by taking let's say cell molecular biology and general chemistry one, then those courses should actually also be listed in the MTA section. My advice is to only put the credit hours in the MTA section and not count the credit hours, but keep those courses in the MiTransfer area so that you can still denote how they meet program requirements. You simply cannot count the credit hours in both places because the MTA requires the 30 minimum for that block to go. And then the final section was really the biggest change to the worksheets. There were several classes that people thought maybe in the spring would be common enough to apply to the full agreement that were removed during this meeting last week. And they were removed because they just weren't common enough. They weren't being taught in the same way, or they weren't required in the same manner to make them commonly transferable across the state. But they were common in some respects, and the workaround that we came up with was this last section, which allows universities to denote courses like that students could take in the first 2 years and might be transferable, but are not already covered as an MTA or a MiTransfer pathway course above. So that final section has different directions for the universities versus the community colleges. And it helps to think of them separately, but also together. So community colleges will be putting in this section any final degree requirements the student needs to complete to get their associate degree. So for a community college, this program worksheet should show the full pathway for the associate degree, all of the courses that need to be taken. And they should fit into one of those 3 categories. If there's a minimum credit hour required that isn't met by all of the courses, that last block that says CC only, add remaining hours, is where the community college will just indicate that number of hours. So it could be 3 hours, it could be 6 hours, I don't know. It'll depend on your program and what is required. But that is what the student will use to then compare against the university sections, which will lay out those additional courses that they might be able to take. So if I'm enrolled at Montcalm Community College, and this is a total example, I'm making it up, but let's say Montcalm has the number 6 in that box at the bottom. That is a signal to the student that they have, and I think Will used this term earlier, and I like it, it's called a strategic elective. They have 6 hours of strategic electives that if they want to get the most bang for their buck, they'd be well served in looking at the university programs they're considering to see which courses are listed as potential transfer courses for them. And then of course they would need to see if their community college offers those courses, or another community college perhaps where they can take that course. So hopefully that explains it. Erica, do you want to step in at all to say anything further about the worksheets before we move forward?
So that sounds good. I just would, these worksheets evolve as this project work evolves, and so we appreciate you refining that as this work continues.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, and then the last couple of things we talked about were course equivalencies. So, okay, we have a question before we move on. How will a student accrue 62 for an associate degree if there are not enough remaining degree requirements needed at the 4-year school? That's a good question, and in some ways it remains to be seen as to what the degree maps look like. So for some, so if you'll go back, sorry Erica, if you'll go back to the worksheet, I think it's easier to answer this question when we look at the worksheet. So in some cases, that's where you're going to put those extra hours in, those remaining hours for the community college student. Let's say if you're looking just rudimentarily at, there were 4 classes in psych, I believe one of them will roll up into the MTA section, at least one of them, which means that there are 3 classes remaining, which is 9 credits typically. So you're looking at 39 credit hours, which obviously, as the question alludes, does not come to an associate degree. That's where, if there are other degree requirements, the community college needs to lay those out, and perhaps you have 1 or 2 other courses a student has to take, or perhaps even more. You know, I would have to look at your unique example. But then those hours that need to be completed to get to the minimum credit hours required for the degree, that's where the student has to start doing some comparative, some shopping, if you will, and probably should already be thinking about their 4-year university destination anyway at that point. And they can choose courses that the universities they're considering have listed in that remaining degree requirements area to fulfill the number of credit hours they still need for their community college degree. I hope I've clarified that. You are welcome to contact any of the project staff after this It looks like I got a thanks, so hopefully that was helpful. So yeah, but feel free, if this is confusing or you're not sure what we mean, please feel free to contact us. We spent a lot of time during the working session walking around and answering questions. I was joking, I mean, people were literally following me into the bathroom to ask me questions, which is fine because we're excited to see the work moving forward. Okay, thank you, Erica. I'll wrap up here and then we'll see what.
Katie, if I could just add one comment to that as well, based on Nicole's question. The idea of this worksheet from the university's perspective is, since there's only, in the psychology example, students would get, 9 to 12 credits in those courses, in the MiTransfer Pathways courses. The universities would need probably to add quite a few customized hours that their students are taking in the first and second year, because students in their first and second year at a university, their students, their native students, are presumably taking somewhere between 60 and 62 hours in the first and second year so that they can graduate within 4 years. We recognize that for universities, this is a different way of thinking about your program, because oftentimes you don't have to think about your program as year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, this kind of arbitrary cutoff between year 2 and year 3. But those programs that don't have very many pathways courses will probably have a lot of courses in these remaining degree requirements to add up to that 60 or 62, depending on how many hours or credits are required for the program.
Right. And
so we would expect to see a lot more in there for psychology, relatively less in an area like biology here, because there's a ton of credits in those pathways courses.
And I was going to just add that, particularly in psychology, there are a number, all of the programs across the state require a certain amount of program electives. So they're set courses that the students have a bit of flexibility in selecting. And just about everybody there kind of said this is the best way to handle this, because the students can still get credit for those site courses that, we may not have as a hard and fast requirement, but they can count toward the required electives, or they might count for other actual program requirements if they're transferable, meaning if they're typically taught in the first 2 years of the program. So good. Okay, let's move forward and talk about course equivalency. So you all know that as part of this project and to make these multi-institutional agreements work, we have to assure transferability among all participating institutions. The way that we do that in Michigan is through the Michigan Transfer Network. You've already heard how we will be overhauling this website, but we are still using it. It's still live, and we are using it for this project to show equivalency of courses in these program areas. We did update the equivalency grids from the spring meeting, so the Phase 1 Meeting 2 website actually has the new grids, and here's an example for just one of them that's new. Please note, if you were at the spring meeting or if you were following those documents otherwise, they were multicolored in the last iteration. This time around, I see that there's a yellow box and it should not be there. We are only trying to focus on green versus white, green meaning direct equivalency, white meaning everything else. The white boxes could mean that there is no equivalency, that there's not a direct equivalency, so it's a gen-tran or a tran-XXX or some other form of not applying direct transfer credit. Or it could be that the university is not submitting to the MTN. And so yes, I got a question here. Will the site be updated? This is my least favorite question because this is really onerous work. I'm doing this manually. There is not a report that comes out of the MTN that gives us this data. So I will be updating it, but I'm not sure that I'll be doing it in any routine or regular manner. I would ask you all if you have an update or a discrepancy to note, particularly if we're using the wrong course for you, and maybe that's why we're not finding transferability or something like that. Please do contact me. I'm Katie Girardello, and you can let me know about that, and then I will make updates like that because I want the information to be accurate. But our biggest concern is that you go into the MTN and submit the data. And once you've done that, feel free to let me know, and then usually I think it takes a little while to cycle through, and then I can make updates. But I'm only pulling this update from the MTN. So our expectation is that the colleges and universities will work together to develop the equivalency, and then the university will submit that data to the MTN so students know that the information is there. So we will be doing these course equivalency grids in a bit of a different format moving forward. Instead of bundling PDFs, I'm going to try to make an uneditable live copy of the Google Forms available to everyone so that when updates are made, it will be live. Okay, but they are there. The ones that were updated for October are on the new site, and if you still have problems that you think need to be addressed, please let me know. All right, again, you'll upload those things there, and then finally we talked about everybody's favorite thing, which is money. Some of you will recall that the state appropriation grant that we received had enough money in it for us to allow stipends for participants of the meetings. We decided, for ease of kind of the volume of payments that are going to need to be made, to wait until after the succession of meetings was completed. So you'll be hearing, or project meeting participants who attended will be hearing from project staff in the next couple of weeks about the next steps they need to take digitally in order to receive their reimbursements. Institutional participants are eligible for a $200 stipend per meeting. So if someone attended both meetings, they could receive $400. And you can see on the screen what is eligible for these expenses. There are no receipts necessary. Usually it's simply a form or some sort of process that we will mitigate digitally, where you'll fill out the information we need in order to make the payment to your individual or your institution, depending on how the travel was paid for up front. So we know some of you, probably your institution's paid, and we can submit a reimbursement directly to the institution, or if you paid out of pocket, then that would come to you directly. Erica, anything further you want to share about travel stipends?
Nope, I just wanted to add that we're compiling the list of people that attended, that we had registered for both meetings. And once we have that compiled together, we'll be sending out a form for you to complete to be able to get that reimbursement. Perfect.
All right. What questions are there? Oh, sorry. I think this is the last slide. You know that we have a number of resources that we have built and are continuing to build on the project website. You're getting a screenshot of what the phase 1 landing page looks like. All of the materials from the previous meetings are posted there. So if you're attending today because you missed the meeting last week, please feel free to pull the meeting materials up and you'll be able to see all of the handouts and documents that were distributed. You'll also see that the new version of the worksheets are loaded up there, and then of course those updated course equivalencies that we just discussed. Colleagues, is there anything further you would like to share, or folks, that's all we have prepared to share with you this afternoon. So if there are questions you would like to type, please go ahead and do that while I check in and see if my colleagues want to say anything final.
This is Erica. Again, I would just add that the faculty that participated in each of the pathways, along with the transfer liaisons, should expect a message from us in the next week, summarizing for each of their pathways some of this information as well, and directing them to those new worksheets and the deadlines that we've established for this work.
Thank you. Sometimes we just, drag it out so that if you guys are typing a question, we don't miss you. But I just also want to, what's that?
I said, that's right. Have we talked long enough for everybody to, to answer their questions?
I think so. It looks like we don't have any new questions coming in. I continue to be incredibly inspired by all of the folks willing to go down some dark hallways with us and have some challenging conversations, and really keeping the student success vision in mind as we work through this complicated work. It has been very rewarding for me to work on this project, and I know my colleagues feel the same way. And I think all of you and most of the folks that attended last week are feeling good about the project and excited about the possibilities that this will provide to the citizens of our state. So with that, and seeing no further questions being typed, I'm going to bid you all farewell, and I hope you have a good afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.